The story of these daughters is a fitting conclusion to what has been a very dismal book. It finishes with the story of 5 women of faith that are going to marry as best as they know in the will of God and for God's purposes. That's what they're doing. What I've wanted to do is to try and make a bit of progress on Numbers. So I'm going to use some evening slots that would otherwise have been on something else to try and move through the book. Educators say that every class has a lifespan. You know that? Every effective class has a lifespan. And there comes a point at which people start losing interest. And I think that is even true in Bible series. And so I really feel that I should try and finish Numbers, Lord willing, most of it this year. And to try and, I want to look at some different topics tonight that a little novel, a bit of out of the ordinary. We've had week after week of, the complaints of God's people against Moses and Aaron. And when you get to Numbers 27, and you have an outline of those passages, I thought it just might be a little bit helpful in terms of us looking on this evening. We're actually towards the very end of the book of Numbers. So by the time you get to Numbers 27, most of the complainers are no longer with us. I'd like to say they're all with the Lord, but I'm not even convinced that's true. I'm not convinced even about that. But that generation that rejected the Lord have perished. And in fact, a chapter earlier in Numbers 26, Moses has another numbering, counts them all over again. And the numbers of men, 20 and above, are not much different from the first census. So God has preserved a healthy number of men to take their families and elderly and young ones into the promised land. So basically, by the time you get to Numbers 27, they're on the verge of the Lord doing exactly what he's told them he would do. But a question comes up in Numbers 27 and then at the end of the book around this matter of inheritances. You might have at the back of your Bible, maybe not, they don't have it in all of the map sections, but in some Bibles at the end you'll have a section, a map of the promised land according to where the tribes would settle. All sort of different colours, names of the tribes. All right. So some Bibles have it, some don't. Okay. Doesn't mean you can just look at your maps the rest of the night, but you might have it at the. If you've got a really expensive Bible, hopefully it's in there. Yeah. It's a bit of a cheaper one, maybe not. But God had given all the tribes certain allotments of land. All right. Imagine dividing, Melton up into 12 sections. That's kind of how God did it. And so it's important that the tribes, once they got into the land, kind of stayed within the boundaries. Because otherwise, people being people like to buy land, buy land off their neighbours. And get better quality land near waterways and, things like that. And so God wanted to preserve the line of the tribes and to keep, by and large, each tribe within its territory. Now, there was an exception. You've heard about the law of Jubilee. Every 50 years, land that had been sold would revert back to the original owners. Okay? And here's how it worked. If you bought land off another tribe and Jubilee was 49 years away, you'd pay a lot more than if you were going to buy some land and it was only 1 year from Jubilee. So it was essentially a way of leasing land. Every 50 years it went back to the original owners. And this meant that people could kind of buy their way out of debt. It gave them a freedom and flexibility to arrange their finances, but in such a way that 50 years later, it went back to the original people. Now, as in other nations of the day, Israel was certainly advantageous to the sons. The firstborn son got 2/3 of his father's inheritance. Now, it doesn't sound fair, does it? It's not. But he was the firstborn, and he was going to carry some extra responsibilities. And there was just a blessing in being the firstborn. So the firstborn would receive 2/3, and the other sons would share the remaining third. So I'm sure my sons are happy they're not in Old Testament times today. Well, two are happy they're not in Old Testament times. So if a man didn't have any sons, he would leave his estate not to his daughter but to nearer male relatives. The daughter was looked after by giving her a dowry on her marriage, and that was her inheritance, right? It was, daughter, we love you, and here's the dowry. This is the wedding gift, and your inheritance, all in one, one big present. It might consist of clothes, jewelry, money, furniture. If you had a really rich dad, he might give you, wait for it, he might give you some servant girls to take with you into your marriage. So when the babies came, you'd have servant girls looking after your children and helping around the house, and it was certainly a higher standard of living. Really wealthy fathers gave their girls land, even cities. You could imagine kings doing that. But after his daughter was married and she'd received her dowry, that was the end of his responsibilities for her. She became a member of her husband's family, and her sons inherited his estate, whether that was in the same tribe or somewhere else. You could marry outside your tribe. But I want to tell you this about the land they had that God gave them. In Leviticus 25, it says, in verse 23, it says, the land shall not be sold permanently, for the land, God says, is mine. It's mine. For you are strangers and sojourners with me. So in a sense, even in the promised land, they're temporary. They're tenants. The same is true of us today. What we have, what God gives us. I mean, I have such a firm grip on everything I own that if I stop breathing, it's all gone. That's the grip I have on earthly things. That's the grip I have. I'm not even in control of my next breath. God is. And so what we have is God's gifts to us that he gives us temporarily to use for him. And so these tribes had an allotment, certainly, but really the land was God's. I mean, he gave them that ability to ultimately to go into the promised land and to inherit. So we come to Numbers 27, and I've put Numbers 27 and Numbers 36 sort of side by side. Hopefully it might help you to see how all this is going to come together. But you have in verse 1 of Numbers 27, you have daughters of a man, Zelophehad, the son of Hepher. Now notice where he's from. So he's the son of Hepher, he's the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh. Now we're starting to remember some names. Manasseh was the son of the famous Joseph. Okay. So these daughters come, and we're given their names as well for posterity. It's not just 5 daughters show up, we're given their names. There's Mahlah, there is Noah. Evidently, it's a male-female name. You remember after October 7, remember there was a young Jewish girl that got taken on a motorbike into Gaza, and it captured that whole day, her terrified face. Now remember, they actually rescued her in an amazing operation a year or two later from Gaza. Her name was Noah. So they're still naming, Jewish girls Noah. Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. Okay, there's a reason for this record. Well, they stand before Moses and before Eleazar. Aaron has died by this point. And before the leaders and all the congregation by the doorway of the tabernacle of meeting. This is a very formal, official occasion. They've came to appeal to Moses as leader, as lawgiver. And they come with a remarkable story. A remarkable story. Look at verse 3. Our father died in the wilderness, but he was not in the company of those who gathered together against the Lord in the company of Korah. They're the ones that just got swallowed up. So he wasn't a rebel with Korah, but he died in his own sin. What a stunning admission. Remember what we've looked at week by week. And people come to Moses and say, Moses, you brought us out here to kill us. Right? You brought us here, Moses, to kill us. Well, the daughters are not saying that. The daughters aren't saying that. Our father died in his own sin. Now they're just stating the fact of it. He just perished like the other unbelieving women. And he had no sons. Fatherless, brotherless. Then they ask this question: why should the name of our father be removed from among his family because he had no son? Give us a possession among our father's brothers. Notwithstanding their father had died in unbelief in the wilderness, hey, he's still part of the tribe of Manasseh. He still has some inheritance entitlements. But the law up to this point, law of Moses, said it's got to go to any other males within the family, uncles and things like that. Okay? So what's Moses do? He could say, I'm sorry, but the law's the law. The law says it's got to go to any other males, any other uncles or others. But Moses knew that they had something to say. He knew that there was an unfairness here. So it says in verse 5, he brought their case before the Lord. Yeah. He didn't say, look, I'm the lawgiver. I came down with the Ten Commandments. The law's the law. That's that. He could have just killed this then and there. That's it. But he doesn't. So he comes to God. And we know that Moses for years now has been sorting out different disputes. Countless disputes. So Moses takes this to the Lord. Look at verse 6. The Lord speaks to Moses saying, verse 7, the daughters of Zelophehad speak what is right. God backs them. He backs them. Yeah, they got a complaint, Moses. They've got one. Up to this point, God's law hadn't dealt with that kind of situation. The assumption was fathers would have sons, be taken care of that way. Then God says, you shall surely give them a possession of inheritance among their father's brothers and cause the inheritance of their father to pass to them. So there's going to be an extension of the existing law. And God tells Moses, verse 8, you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, if a man dies and has no son, no sons, then you shall cause his inheritance to pass to his daughter. If he has no daughter, then you shall give his inheritance to his brothers. In verse 10, if he has no brothers, then you shall give his inheritance to his father's brothers. We're going to find a man somehow. We're going to find him somehow. Right? And if his father has no brothers, verse 11, you shall give his inheritance to the relative closest to him in his family, and he shall possess it. Right? So at some point they're going to find an heir. And it shall be to the children of Israel a statute of judgment, just as the Lord commanded Moses. It's going to be added to the law because this case came up that was unfair. And God is interested in dealing with unfairness. Now, this situation was not unique. This wasn't going to be the only family of daughters. There was going to be others that, or you could imagine sons dying in battle. There are no sons left. Right? This decision was going to impact generations of God's people. And so this was this test case. Why should a family be penalised? Because he had no son. Even if the girls married, they wouldn't normally inherit anything. They would just be absorbed into their husband's clan. But what if they didn't marry? What would happen to them then? And so in this way, the daughters could keep the name of their father going. Being a wise man, Moses took this matter to God. It reminds me of Proverbs 2:6, the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach. It will be given to him. James chapter 1, verse 5. And so Moses got into the habit of bringing hard things to the Lord. Right? What are we to do with hard things? Bring them to God. What do we do with things that don't seem to fit within, the existing frame of life, reference? We bring them to God, and somehow God gives us the wisdom to do what is fair. We have it. These things come up all the time. Now, someone said, look, why do these girls come to Moses like now? They're not in the land yet. Why don't they ask later? One idea is that these daughters showed faith in the divine promises. They were asking this by faith, so certain they were going into the promised land. They stand in contrast to their parents, that other generation, that said it's too hard to even go in. And these daughters saying, when we get in, we want that land that our father would have taken. We want the land that was due to him in his name. And as one writer said, this is much more than ancient civil rights for women. Here God was declaring once again that the effects of his grace are wider than the judgment of death caused by man's sin. There is a sense in which their father, who died in unbelief, did he deserve anything in the promised land? No, he deserved nothing. He died in unbelief. But God's grace is greater than human sin. It's greater than all things. Let me read you this quote. Notice what they're asking for. They're not asking for the right to run everything, to have a vote, and hey, that's got its place, and actually, all the rights afforded to women have been fairly recent. Rather, what they want is an inheritance in a land that was promised by God but not yet possessed. Indeed, these young women are young women of faith, quite different from their parents. Now, you get to the book of Judges and you have this second generation syndrome happening. But here, these young women have more faith than their parents. It seems like God punishing that generation in the wilderness had a purifying effect on the next generation. It certainly impacted those daughters. Unlike the men of the former generation who lacked faith to enter the land, their female children declared in essence, the land is ours, we want our share. We want in. We want our inheritance. And, this is not name it and claim it. This is claiming what God had named for them earlier. Right? They're not just inventing things to claim. God had promised them certain parts of the land. Now, in Numbers 27, problem solved. Problem solved. But if you've ever worked with people, you know that when you solve one problem, you just create another one. Or more. Sometimes you wish you had the original problem. You just wish you had those early problems, because you get solutions and you got all these extra problems. We get to Numbers 36. Right? Remember in Numbers 27 we meet the daughters, these daughters. But look at verse 1. Now the chief fathers of the children of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, of the family sons of Joseph, these are the tribal leaders of Manasseh, that these daughters are a part of, the tribe. They came near, spoke before Moses and before the leaders, the chief fathers of the children of Israel, right? And they said, the Lord commanded my Lord Moses to give the land as an inheritance by lot to the children of Israel. Yes, that's true. And my Lord was commanded by the Lord to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughters. Yes, that's correct. It's Numbers 27. They're all correct so far. Look at verse 3. Now if Moses, what if this happens? What if they are married to any of the sons of the other tribes of the children of Israel? Then their inheritance will be taken from the inheritance of our fathers. They're thinking these girls, they're landowners now. They're landowners, Moses. But what if they go marry outside the other tribes? It says, be added to the inheritance of the tribe into which they marry, so be taken away from the lot of our families. You see what's happening here? They're concerned that these daughters go marry outside of Manasseh, and they're going to start bleeding land. At least, right? They're going to start bleeding land. And you know what? Jubilee doesn't deal with inheritance. It just deals with transferring, leasing, selling land, so to speak, right? It doesn't deal with inheritances. And these chief fathers, they're not happy. They're not happy, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. The tribe of Manasseh is going to be weakened. Now look at verse 5, and verse 4 covers what I said about Jubilee. Then Moses commanded the children of Israel, according to the word of the Lord, saying, now we assume here that Moses prayed like he did in 27, because Moses says, according to the word of the Lord. Maybe it's just assumed that Moses prayed and we're supposed to understand that, because many, many times Moses is praying throughout Exodus and Numbers, saying, look at this, what the tribe of the sons of Joseph speak is right. That's what God had said concerning the daughters. They're right, and they're right. Okay, if you ever want to frustrate two people arguing, just say, you're right and you're right. Problem solved. You're both right. So they got a legitimate complaint. They're going to lose land within the tribe. Now, look at what God commands. Look at verse 6. This is what the Lord commands concerning the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, okay, God has something for these 5 daughters. Got something for them. And by extension, every other tribe that's going to follow. God says this, let them marry whom they think best. God said they could marry whoever they wanted. What's wise? Marry him. But God says, look, they can marry whom they can marry from any tribe they want to. Well, they want to get into Judah. That's a pretty cool tribe, isn't it? The lawgiver's coming from Judah. But they may marry only within the family of their father's tribe. That is to keep the land. Right? If they're going to keep the land, they're going to have to marry someone within the tribe of Manasseh. Yeah? They go outside, they forfeit. They forfeit. Now look at verse 7. So the inheritance of the children of Israel shall not change hands from tribe to tribe, for every one of the children of Israel shall keep the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers. And every daughter who possesses an inheritance in any tribe of the children of Israel shall be the wife of one of the family of her father's tribe, so that the children of Israel each may possess the inheritance of his fathers. Thus no inheritance shall change hands from one tribe to another, but every tribe of the children of Israel shall keep its own inheritance. There's a bit of repetition there. There's a repetition, but God is wrapping this up. If they marry someone within Manasseh, they keep the land. If they go outside the tribe, they forfeit. Right? Now, look at verse 10. Verse 10. Just as the Lord commanded Moses, so did the daughters of Zelophehad. They're going to obey God's command. Now this is a common phrase in the first 10 or so chapters of the obedience of God's people. They are obeying and they're obeying and they're obeying. And then it all stops. It all stops. But just as the Lord commanded Moses, so did these daughters. And they are named again in verse 11. We got their names a second time. Look at this. They were married to the sons of their father's brothers. They got to marry their cousins. That's what happened. Got to marry their cousins. Lucky girls. Got to marry them, all of them. Got husbands. And it meant that the land stayed with the tribe of Manasseh. They could have married anyone, but they're going to walk away from the land. But they're concerned about their father. They're concerned about their tribe. And so you would say that these daughters married obediently. They married obediently. In fact, it says, just as the Lord commanded Moses, so did the daughters. They married in God's will. Married in God's will. Maybe they were better looking guys than their cousins. Cousins. Right? Maybe there are other guys that had more property in a safer place. But this was about the plan of God for Manasseh. This was about being in their tribe. It's about the land. It's about God's promise. They're willing to organise their life around the promises that God has. Totally unlike the generation before. These 5 daughters are refreshing, are they not? Refreshing. Marriage was more than just their own interests. More than their own interests. Much more. Much more. Now, look at the last... Actually, I should have put this down. I didn't put this down on your outline, I think. But let me read the last verse in Numbers. Read the last verse in Numbers. These are the commandments and the judgments which the Lord commanded the children of Israel by the hand of Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan across from Jericho. The book finishes quite positively with a resolution of this second problem around allotments of land. It finishes on a very positive note. The story of these daughters is a fitting conclusion to what has been a very dismal book. It finishes with the story of 5 women of faith that are going to marry as best as they know in the will of God and for God's purposes. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing. Imagine trying to tell someone today that your marriage is more than just what makes you happy. Imagine trying to sell that to anyone. You know, your marriage, or the one that you want to marry, or the one that you're married to, it's really a lot more than you being happy. If you're a Christian, it's to bring God glory, to promote his kingdom somehow through your union. These women got that. It was more than just what they wanted. It was about furthering God's interests in this world. And when you have Moses in the plains of Moab by the Jordan, they're right on the Jordan across from Jericho, they're on the threshold. It's been said that this invites the reader to keep reading. That's what it does. It invites the reader to see, after God solves this issue of inheritance, okay, let's keep reading, see what God does. Does he bring them in the promised land or not? It finishes on a strong note. Now, in our in the Bible reading tonight, Glenn read a few verses from 1 Peter, which talks about a believer's inheritance today. And our inheritance is far more certain than any tribal allocation, because though there is a nation of Israel today, I'm pretty sure they're not all living according to the tribes. Maybe some are. I could see that happening, but by and large, they're all over the place. And even these laws here of inheritance, I mean, they all go out the window when you get taken to captivity, true? That all goes, it's gone. So Israel haven't really enjoyed this ideal for very long when all's said and done. But Peter says that we have an inheritance incorruptible. He says it's undefiled. He says it doesn't fade away. Our inheritance gets better and better and better. And then he says, finally, it's reserved in heaven. It's somewhere else. Can't be taken, can't be lost, can't be bought, can't be traded. This final inheritance is reserved because we are kept by the power of God. That's why. We have God's unbreakable promise. And so when we look at these passages in Numbers and we find comfort and strength from these unlikely sisters, these powerful sisters, who all five of them had greater faith in their family. They had greater faith in their family and held on to the Lord and impacted many generations that followed.